Hey everyone, James Labrie from Dream Theater, and you're listening to or watching the podcast Talking into Infinity with JT and Brian. Enjoy this. These guys are extremely informative. I love their dialogue. I love their interpretation of the songs, who and what we are, what we were going after. They're very accurate in their interpretations and descriptions, and I just think this is a great show, and these guys are doing a stand-up stellar job. So once again, enjoy Talking into Infinity with JT and Brian.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Talking into Infinity. I am your host, John. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, talkingintoinfinity.com, and the cmsnetwork.com. We are live at those four locations every other Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are watching on YouTube, please do not forget to click that like and subscribe button so that you get notified every time we go live. If you would like to catch video replays of the show, go to our YouTube channel, or better yet, subscribe to Heavy Metal Television. And if you would like to download the audio versions of the show, just Google Talking into Infinity Podcast, and you can find us on any audio platform that you can think of. Very, very excited for today's episode. We have somebody on that I've actually been looking forward to talking to for quite a long time. If you guys have tuned into the show at any point over the history of the, what did we at, like 39, 40 episodes we've been doing this, you've heard Brian and I talk about the phenomenal Dream Theater biography, Lifting Shadows. We've mentioned it so many times on the show. I've read it cover to cover. I can't even tell you how many times, and it is a true honor and privilege. Today, we have on the author of that fantastic book, Mr. Rich Wilson. Rich, what's going on, man? Thanks for making time.
Hi, John. Yeah, great to be here. So
I know we talked a little bit off air, so you and I are kind of imbibing here. It's about 7 o'clock your time. It's 2 o'clock my time. So you've got some scotch, I've got some craft beer. So gonna have a great conversation. Yeah. Again, as I told you, I am a huge fan of the book. It is an absolutely fantastic read. Right out of the gate, talk about the genesis of the project. Like, where did this idea come from, and how did you get this started?
I think I was doing an interview with Mike Portnoy for a classic rock magazine, which must have been before Train of Thought came out. So we just end the conversation. I said, listen, you've got a great story. Someone should write a book. And he goes, well, many people have suggested it, but no one's actually done it. So I sort of sat with that for a while. And then I dropped him a couple of emails, just sort of said, I'm thinking of writing it. And he basically said, well, how about you go away, write a couple of chapters, see what we think, and we'll take it from there. So I interviewed a few people around the band, one of which was David Prater, who is the producer of Images and Words. And David is really kind of forthright in what he says. It doesn't care, basically. Yep. So I sort of drafted the Images and Words chapter, sent it over to the band who were in the studio, and they were just like, hell, we can't have this. So that kind of spurred them into getting involved, really. So yeah, that's how it started. So that was probably 2004, and then I started, really getting stuck into the interviews probably a year later, 2005. So yeah, that was the start of it.
So how long did this take? I mean, was it a continuous process, or did you have to go away from it and come back? Like how did this,
Yeah, I mean, I'd do a bit and then leave it. So I mean, the interviews were probably in 2004, 2005, and the book came out in 2007. So over those 2 years, on and off, I'd be working on it and slipping things into place. Mike Portnoy was hugely involved in it. It probably wouldn't have happened without his involvement, I have to say. So I remember they were in the studio recording Octavarium, and I was kind of speaking to him every day. We're just sort of covering a different album off. So yeah, it soon started to form after that, really. And then the other guys got involved to a probably lesser extent in hindsight than probably we would have liked. But yeah, so that's how it all came together. And the good thing was that everyone wanted to speak to me, so it kind of gives you a good idea that, the band aren't, they're well respected in the industry. So anyone I approached, apart from one person, was up for being interviewed, which was unusual. And yeah, it was great. Really enjoyed doing it.
So the one person I'm assuming is Mr. Kevin Moore. I think
Yes.
everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Did you have any contact with him, or did you send did you even get a response, or was it just no?
Yeah, no, I did email him, and he came back to me and said he wasn't interested. And it was just, yeah, I, what can you do? He's got his own life and wants to do what he wants to do. So you can't force anybody. I tried approaching him several different ways, and by the end of it, he was probably thoroughly sick of me. So, in fact, I remember he had a Chroma Key album coming out, and we were supposed to do the magazine we're doing with an interview with him for it, and he said he's happy to interview, but as long as it wasn't me he was speaking to. So yeah, I thoroughly hacked him off, I think, which is a shame.
Wow.
But, yeah.
Wow. So what is your history with Dream Theater as like a fan, or
Yeah.
how far back do you go with these guys?
So I was thinking about this today. I remember that there used to be here in Britain on a Friday and Saturday night there'd be a rock show on national radio, and it was probably Easter '88 that the DJ played a track off the first album. I just thought it was amazing, and I spent weeks trying to get hold of a copy, because every time you go into a record shop, they'd be stuck. You'd never find Dream Theater. It was always Dream Academy, Dream Syndicate, and all these other bands, and because it was an import as well. So I finally got hold of it, and I just blew me away. So yeah, that album, and then the next two albums again, I just really got into, and it took it from there really. Yeah.
So now, were you a writer at the time, or how far back does your career? Let's get into a little bit of what you do outside of this, because
Yeah.
obviously we're talking about the Dream Theater book, but I mean, you've got a pretty prolific writing career, outside of that book. So talk a little bit about that.
I started doing when I was at university. I wrote for the magazine there and interviewed a few bands, and then I probably started doing it, properly in 98, 99, writing for different magazines, and just built it up from there. So yeah, it's been good fun, I have to say. But probably doing that book was probably the best thing I've ever done. I really enjoyed doing it, and yeah, to have the access like that was, yeah, you don't get that normally.
So how much? I have to assume that you probably have some stuff, and I won't ask you to divulge this, of course, but I have to assume that you got some stuff out of the research process that you could not put into the book. Was there a lot of that, or were you actually able to put pretty much everything into the book?
Yeah, there wasn't much. I mean, that was a good thing. No one in the band. I mean, it's utopia for a writer. You've got full access to the band. You can write what you want, and they don't want any editorial control over it. It's just unheard of, really. So when it had been finished, in hindsight, I sent it over to Mike Portnoy, who read it, and there was nothing really taken out, a couple of corrections and stuff. And I had kind of assumed that the rest of the band had read it in full at that point, but that probably wasn't the case. So there may well have been stuff that they wanted taken out, but yeah, I just had no clue that they hadn't read it really until it came out, which was, yeah.
So for you, what was the most difficult part of getting this completed?
Getting it published. Honestly, because Dream Theater are a cult band, mainstream publishers wouldn't look at it. So I ended up speaking to a book production company, and they were dubious as well. So you may remember we set up a website where people could register their interest. So we needed sort of 4,000 or 5,000 people to sign up just to get it, printed, which happened in days. And again, that was because of Mike Portnoy's input, sending out the emails to people. And there was a great forum community then as well. The MikePortnoy.com forum was fantastic. It was a great place to sort of hang out and spread the word about what you were up to, and people just bought into the whole thing. And it was so once we'd got the numbers up, then it was all go really. So yeah, that was probably the hardest bit. Everything else was a dream really.
Yeah, I remember when that site came up, because I I daily look at, music news websites, and I saw, oh, Dream Theater biography. I was like, what the hell? And I remember, I showed you, off
Yeah.
camera. I've got the images and words like big deluxe version, and I could not go to that website fast enough, and
Yeah.
I remember I actually put off paying a couple bills at the time just to pre-order the book.
No.
And I was like, I have to have this.
John, that's insane.
My credit score is still okay though, so
Thank you. Yeah.
No, you're welcome. Like, yeah, I was so excited for it. I remember seeing that, going, wow, like, and I thought, as you said, man, this is a cult band. Like, this is going to be really cool. So, a buddy of mine, pre-ordered it as well. So man, it was really just a couple days that you raised that money, huh? That's awesome.
Yeah, they got the sign up to the people who were interested within probably a week, and then it was just a case of probably a few months later they were kind of putting it out to order, and then it all went from there. But especially on that first edition, I just really wanted to do a really good job. Apart from the actual text, make sure there was, say you've got the book of images there. There's a great CD with it of rare stuff, which again was down to Mike. So yeah, it was, as a package, it was really good.
Yeah.
And a lot of people seem to buy into it as well, which I say was great.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'd like not to fanboy, but it's a really great read. You and I were talking before we jumped on here, and as I said, for anybody that hasn't read it, I'm a big fan of music biographies and whatnot, and most of them they'll get into really deep detail in the early years, into the early years of a band, and then the later years are kind of just like glossed over, like, yeah, they put some more stuff out. But your book is different in that you have as much detail about albums like Train of Thought and Octavarium as you do for stuff like Awake and Scenes from a Memory and whatnot. So talk a little bit about keeping that flow throughout the book and not just making it your standard, okay, well, they have this other stuff late in their career type of a read.
I think it's because certainly on those albums, things happened, Awake, there was, James had problems with his voice, and then, Falling into Infinity, what a great album that was. Different with again, personnel change, and then personnel change again. And it's just, things happened. Obviously, I think if you look at the last 10 years of Dream Theater, probably that's one of the reasons I probably haven't updated the book. One, because I don't know if there's an appetite within the band for me to do it. And the other thing is, it has kind of gone into that more, write, record, tour cycle. And there haven't been personnel changes. The albums are all great, but they're consistent. There's not like a poppy album. There's not a classic metal album. There's not a prog epic, unless you obviously put The Astonishing into that category. But the rest of them are all just classic Dream Theater albums. So it was just good, because so many things happened during that time that you could really dig into it. And certainly at that time, Mike Portnoy was very open. So if you asked the right question, you would get a really straight answer, which again, just opened the whole thing up. Because there was that time, again, you'll probably know better than me, when they had a chat with James about, whether they wanted to continue with him as a singer, and that all came out of just conversations that I had no clue about. It wasn't in the press. It just, opened doors when I spoke to Mike, really. So yeah, there's just things happened. It just made it interesting.
So I'm glad you brought up David Prater, because, in the course of your interviews and stuff, like I'd like to talk about, talking with the guys and whatnot. But
yeah,
I think one of the most interesting parts of the book, at least for me, was, all the stuff that you have in there about David Prater. And, for anybody who doesn't know, as you said, he, was the producer on Images and Words. He was also the producer on the Change of Seasons EP. And it obviously was very contentious, that relationship. So talk a little bit about that, and, having to kind of balance being professional with wanting to put some pretty salacious details into the book, considering, as you said, he's very direct.
Yeah. I mean, that's great for a writer to have that. It's better than people being diplomatic. Who wants that? You want him to come out with stuff, and he's great. You should get him on the show. I'm sure he would. But I think the bone of there was basically between him and Mike. I don't think Mike was happy with the drum sound because he was effectively using electronic drums, which on the snare, so it has a particular tight sound to it. So I think they fell out about that, and obviously David just doesn't care what he says. You know, he just comes out with it. And there was an incident later on when I think maybe it was on Change of Seasons, perhaps, that James and him nearly came to blows in the studio, I think, or James was upset and had to walk around the studio for half an hour to calm down. But so you just stuff like that. It just comes in, you just slot it into the chapter and then just get the band to respond to it. It's great, you know. You couldn't, you know, you just want people to be honest and just say what happened, and that's what I got with David. You know, he's great. I'm sure a lot of people would read the book and hate him, you know, just because he's having a go at the band, but he's great value. You know, he really is. He's had a really interesting life as well, so you should get him on. He's gold.
I would love to. I don't know what I would ask him, because it's like, you know, we've got a Dream Theater show. Is this guy going to come onto a Dream Theater show and just start slagging them? Like, got that worry going on. I know. I actually interviewed John Petrucci a couple of years ago, and off air I had to ask him. I said, you know, is David Prater as big of a dick as he sounds like in the book? And he just kind of laughed and kind of glossed over the question. I was like, oh boy, I think he might have pissed off John Petrucci as well at some point.
Yeah, possibly. But he's had in terms of a life, I know he was in prison for a while, and he's had a really interesting time. But yeah, I think that was just the crux of it. It was just the drum sound, and he's quite, you know, Mike Portnoy probably at that time was quite stubborn about what he wanted, and David's probably the same. So you just got that clashing of heads, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, good guy.
So real quick Dream Theater question here for you. We're talking about the triggers, and I think if I remember right, the triggers were from the Firehouse record.
Yes.
So I got to get your opinion on this. So there's the Images and Words version, and then the Greatest Hit record. You know, Mike went back and redid the snare and the kick. I don't know if you're familiar with it or if you've paid attention to it, because it's not a huge thing, but if you have, do you have a preference for one or the other?
Do you know what? I haven't listened to that in years. I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I mean, realistically, real drums sound better than triggered snares, don't they? Because there's more feeling in it rather than just
I listened to it, and something about the natural drums, it just doesn't sound right to me, because I think we're so used to hearing Images and Words as it is, that it's kind of like, wow, that doesn't sound, you know. But so another great story in the book, which, you know, now is of course infinitely famous, you know, James's story about his bad breakfast in Cuba. On the Awake tour. So talk a little bit about that, like, because obviously that's something that none of us knew, but it affected him for years and years. I mean, he said, you know, that he did not get back to being, you know, vocally, you know, right. He felt until 6 Degrees, which was, you know, 8 years later.
Yeah, I think he'd had some pork or something, and he ended up getting food poisoning, and obviously being really, really sick, and probably just doing his vocal cords in. So you don't hear it on the record, but obviously when he's out on tour, it was probably struggling for a year or two. I think he probably admit that himself, but he's got back to it, hasn't he? You know, he can still hit the high notes and things. So yeah, I mean, that must have been. I mean, there's no hiding for a singer, is there? Really? You know, you're there. You've got a microphone. It's not. You know, you can't hide behind your instrument. You just in front of everybody singing. If something's off, then everyone's going to notice and comment on it. So yeah, it must be difficult.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still love the first album as well with Charlie on it. I mean, I love that album. It's great. It's probably one of my favorite albums of Dream Theater.
Yeah. It's so underrated, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's probably down to the production. And anyone who's got used to listening to James's vocals and then goes back to the debut, they probably just don't rate it because it's not James on there. But it is a great album.
I think it was our second episode, we deep dove into that record, and you know, we've gotten a lot of emails about it. I'm with you. Like it's very overlooked, and Charlie sounds great on that record. And you know, I completely agree with you. I really think it comes down to production. You know, and there's the remastered version, which cleans it up a little bit. But, you know, those songs are just, you know, A Fortune in Lies is always a banger. I'm a huge fan of Status Seeker. I know that's like the last one they wrote, and it's poppy, but like you said, there's so much going on there. It's just,
Yeah.
I think it slots in beautifully with, those first three records just have a certain kind of classic feel to them. Kevin Moore's writing style was very definitive and kind of like major key, and I'm terrible at music notation, but
Yeah, me too.
I'm glad that you brought that up. My co-host Brian, who's usually on, he's actually a trained pianist and stuff, so he'll get into all the keys and scales, and I'm like, it sounds good because it's loud.
Yeah, he was. I mean, Only a Matter of Time was sort of my favorites as well. The keyboards on that are fantastic, and he is.
Yep.
I think that's the thing with Dream Theater. You look at the history. Each of those keyboard players has brought something completely different to, the sound. Kevin was great. Lyrically, he was great. Musically, he was great. Then Derek comes in, and he's got a whole different vibe going on. And then obviously Jordan is, again, a classically trained, genius, really. So all the way through, they've had that, that keyboard backing that's suited them. I mean, what do you think? Who's your favorite keyboard player?
I am a Derek Sherinian guy. So I love all of them.
Yeah.
But my favorite record, and this is, it's actually a joke on the show. I catch a lot of crap from our fans for this, but I love Falling Into Infinity. There's it's a unique record to me. It's a little bit more loose. There's more of a kind of a jam type of a feel to it that I really enjoy. And I think Derek's keyboard playing skews a little closer towards rock. So I love what he brings to the table in that aspect of it, and I've just always been a big fan of his style.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that being said, I mean, Kevin Moore, like I said, those first three records, they're so definitive in their sound. I think that it's just up and positive and happy. And then Jordan, I mean, can do no wrong. So, what's your preference? Who's your favorite?
They're just so different. I mean, I do like Derek. Derek's, when you speak to him, he's great value for money. He's fantastic, and I love his keyboard style. He is more rock. He was in Alice Cooper band, and he comes from that more of a rock showman background, which I think the band needs sometimes. When you're on stage, he was quite a focal point. So yeah, I mean, you can't deny any of them. They're all brilliant, but. Yeah, Derek was different, which I think that makes the album, Falling Into Infinity so good, really.
So do you have a favorite Dream Theater record?
Probably the first album, and probably Images and Words, I would say.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think certainly anything. Yeah, where do you start? I mean, they're all so good, aren't they? Really. Scenes from Memories is a classic as well, isn't it? But yeah, so those 3 or 4 for me.
So getting back to the book, and by the way, anybody watching, if you shoot us an email at talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com, the first person to get an email through to us, you are going to win a copy of Lifting Shadows, Rich's phenomenal biography of Dream Theater. So talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com. Just shoot us an email for your chance to win a copy of the book. We talked about David Prater. We talked about the James chapter. I think one of the interesting things is that you have a pretty good amount of stuff from John Mayung in the book, and he does not talk very much. So anything in the book, is that basically all you got from him? Or how much interaction did you have with John? Because he's notoriously quiet.
Do you know, I spoke to him, it must have been the Octavarium tour. It was at London Hammersmith Odeon. And it was the first time I spoke to him backstage. And yeah, that was a tough interview for me because he is so quiet. It takes a while for him to open up. He's a lovely guy, but he's just not his bag. He doesn't really do interviews. So the only interviews that I could get were maybe, the odd press interview we've done, and that one time that I spoke to him face to face. But yeah, everyone's different. That's just not his thing, really. So yeah, it was tricky trying to get his side of things, but he wasn't one of the members of the band who'd been embroiled in any controversy or anything like that. So it was kind of okay that it was more peripheral to the story. Whereas obviously if any of the other guys had not been up for interviews, then that would have been more of a problem, really.
Yep. So did you talk to anybody outside of the band, like bands they toured with? Was there, I mean, they had that infamous tour with Queensryche. You've got a great story I'd like to get to in a minute about that tour. Did you talk to anybody else that, and some things that did not end up in the book?
And if anyone I spoke to, and it was straight into the text. So, I mean, the bands I spoke to, there was Ben Huggins, Galactic Cowboys, wasn't he?
Yep.
And also I spoke to Chris Jericho for some reason. I guess he must have been at that. There was a gig where something kicked off. I can't remember the details of it. So I spoke to him, and didn't speak to Queensryche. I don't think the feeling between the two bands was that great when I was writing it because of that tour. So yeah, go on, spill what happened.
So I mean, if you're a Dream Theater fan, so what were your thoughts when John told you the story about Mike Stone trying to give him tips and like, hey, do this, do that? Like, what the hell? Like, what was, as a fan, what were you thinking when you heard that?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, it's like getting tips off poison or something, isn't it? Really. But
nice.
no, he's a good. No, I mean, Queensryche are great. They are a good band. But yeah, I mean, it's not. You don't do that, do you? Really? Tell someone that the guitar needs to be more soulful and stop it with the technical stuff. It's harsh. But I can imagine it didn't go around down too well with John. Although, John Petrucci being who he is, it didn't sort of upset him as much as it upset Mike Portnoy, who, I remember he had a dig back, I think, as you'd expect.
Yep.
So yeah, that was odd.
Do you have a favorite story that ended up in the book?
I think. I mean, it wasn't, the most uplifting story, but I suppose managing to get hold of the band within a few days of Mike Portnoy leaving, that was useful because you could get all sides of the story. So that was really good to get that in, and that's we were literally preparing the second edition when he left, so we had to kind of delay it and just find out what had gone on there, really. So yeah, I was lucky to get the sort of inside story on that, because obviously I think they kind of shut up about it after the first month or two. So that was good to get that.
That I love that that's in the book. It's as soon as I saw that you had added that chapter, of course I went out and purchased it a second time. I mean, how difficult was that to actually, because you had this great relationship with them, obviously, especially Mike, like getting the book done and doing all these interviews, but now it's kind of like, two different camps. They're kind of, the guy quit and the rest of the band is like, what the hell? So, I mean, was there any difficulties there? Did anybody not want to talk about it, or?
Yeah, Mike didn't want to talk about it. He kind of sent me an email with a few details in there, much of which was in the sort of press statement that he released. And the rest of the guys did speak to me. So yeah, it was difficult, really. I was shocked, to be honest, when he left. I just didn't think he'd ever leave. But I suppose you look back now and probably think the signs maybe were there that he would kind of leave. But to me, he was always he was a central part of the band. It's like John Petrucci leaving. To me, it just didn't make any sense. But I don't think Mike's done many interviews in the last couple of years, full stop, because every time he speaks to the press or something, someone takes a quote out of context and chucks it on Blabbermouth. So
yep. It's. Oh, I think I lost you for a second there. That was a crazy, crazy time. And something I'd like to ask you if we get you back here. I think you froze up on me there, but, that was something that, was obviously widely reported, and us, being fans and everything like that, we're familiar with the stories, but I really wonder if there's any part of that has not been reported. Like how are the guys actually feeling? Because on John Petrucci's side and everything, we've seen the interviews with the band, like, oh, we were surprised and we were hurt, but I really wonder, and we'll see if we can get Rich back here for a second. I really wonder, what we haven't heard. Was there a lot of anger there? Was there animosity? We all know the stories, like, excuse me, they went and did, the Liquid Tension Experiment record. How many years later, over, basically a decade later, they're finally playing together again. And, Mike plays on John's solo record. And, for guys that grew up together, they've been friends since, they were teenagers. I really wonder what the true emotions were, what was there. And, at some point, I'm sure we'll get that. And, man, that's something that's always so fascinating to me because, anybody who's watched the show knows I play in a band and I'm familiar with the, interpersonal, relationships that go on there. And there's so much more than what people see. And so it'd be interesting to really, years down the road, really dig into that. But, hopefully we can get Rich back here. For those of you guys that are just tuning in, again, send us an email at talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com. The first email that we receive, you will win a copy of Lifting Shadows. And we got Rich back. So there you are.
About that. That was my end. I'm kind of out in the sticks a bit, so sometimes the net cuts off, but we're good. Sorry about that.
Sure, not a problem. So I was wondering, what the emotions were at the time for both camps, Portnoy and the rest of the band, and having interviewed them both, what was your sense? Because publicly we got, the band, they were hurt, they were shocked. Mike was like, okay, I need a break. But having talked to them, was there something more to it? Like, how were they feeling? Like, how raw was that emotion?
Yeah, I think certainly Jordan was very upset by it. I remember there was an interview with him where he said he was in tears sitting on the back step of his garden when he found out, and and I think the problem is when people leave, there's always business stuff that gets in the way. So that kind of would affect friendships when people have to start paying out sums of money for people and that sort of thing. So probably took a few years for them to get over that, which they finally seem to have done now, which is great. But yeah, it must be just hugely difficult because you're losing a friend and a bandmate that you've worked with for so many years, and then, as I say, the business side gets into it, and it can't have been easy for either of them, really.
So, as a fan, when that news came down, what were your thoughts? Because all of us were like, "How in the hell can Mike Portnoy leave Dream Theater?" And so what were your thoughts just from a fan standpoint at that point?
Yeah. I think the thing with Mike was that he was more than just a drummer. He did everything. He was almost a fan himself. So those are some of the things that I really miss. Like if they were playing a second night in a city, the second night they'd always play a whole cover album, in its entirety, and there'd be Christmas CDs and all these sort of things that he got involved in. And just from a fan's perspective, I knew probably that was all going to go, which it has done, really. And I think that's a really sad thing. They do tend to stick to the same set list, which I can understand because it's a lot easier. They can make sure everything's running spot on the show in terms of the lights, the screens, and everything. But yeah, I do miss that spontaneity whereby you could go to a show and something random could be thrown to the set list that only you're going to see on that particular night. So yeah, I knew that would go, and that was really the sad thing. Mike Portnoy's a great drummer. You could replace him with someone who is a fantastically gifted musician, but can you replace the character behind the drum set? It's like replacing Keith Moon with Gavin Harrison. It's just it's a difficult one. So. But that was the reality of it. They had to move on, and obviously Mike Mangini's coming in and done a great job. Can't fault what he's done, really.
So my co-host Brian, again, he can't be on, but he does have a question for you. We've already gotten to, your favorite record, but he says, sorry I can't be in studio with you guys. Wanted to pop in quickly and ask, what is Rich's favorite song from Dream Theater?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think the thing is, again, with the first album, because it was sort of a period in my life when I was at college, didn't have a lot of money. You would buy an album and you would listen to it for 3 or 4 weeks before you could afford to buy another one. So only a matter of time has always got a, for me, is always one of the finest tracks just because I've listened to it that many times. I don't know. I mean, it's impossible, isn't it? Metropolis is fantastic. I could listen to that all day. I mean, there's been some good tracks on some of the recent albums as well. I like Barstool Warrior. That was a good one. Quite influenced by Rush, that, isn't it?
A little bit.
But I don't know. It's hard to pick one out, really. I mean, you're a big Rush fan as well, aren't you? So
yeah, my co-host, that's his band. And
yeah.
I'm not quite as familiar as he is. But I mean, yeah, some of like Barstool Warrior, like you said, definitely Rush influence, and they've got a couple others, that on the new record, they've got one, and on the self-titled, that Barstool Warrior is good. Yeah, Only a Matter of Time is great. Have you ever caught that song live? Any of the shows you've been to?
Yeah, it was great. I can't remember. They may have played that at Radio City, which I was lucky to be at. I can't remember, but I love that song.
Yep. So you were at Score?
Yeah, I got really lucky. I ended up in the orchestra pit, so I was right at the front, and that wasn't like a freebie guest list job. I just got lucky when I bought the ticket, So it was insane. But yeah, that was great. I must say, the access they gave me was unbelievable. I was in the studio when they were recording Octavarium and had the orchestra in and recording those parts. I was just so lucky, really. I can't thank them enough for it. It was just a great time doing it. But yeah, you can't pick a favorite song, really. I think there's so many. It's hard to sort of narrow it down to just the one.
Yep.
I mean, you're probably the same. I mean, it's hard to pick one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I actually do have one that I single out frequently. It's Trial of Tears.
Mm-hmm.
Just something about that song just resonates with me. But if I had to go and say, beyond that, it's like you said, it's pretty much impossible. There's so many, and the cool thing is, like you said, like the you kind of hinted at this. The quality of the records just has remained solid throughout, and as a result, it's hard to really pick a favorite because there's not really a down period of their career. So, there's songs on, Distance Over Time that I love. There's songs, on When Dream and Day Unite that I love. And I mean, there's something on every record that's, really stands out. So
yeah, The Count of Tuscany, that's another one. That's fantastic. I could listen. It's just another epic, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I wish my co-host was on. That's his go-to. Count of Tuscany is Brian's go-to. So
yeah. It's great, and the latest album's great as well. But I think it's probably the best album in about 10 years. It is really consistent. But I think The Astonishing was quite diversive, wasn't it? Really, I mean, you probably got your finger on the pulse of Dream Theater fans more than I have. But I imagine it was kind of a love it or hate it album, wasn't it? Really,
it's exactly how it is. And, I'm in the love it camp. I think it's like the most Dream Theater thing that they've ever done, and I to me it's I love the balls in 2016, 2017, whatever, like to come out with a double concept record in an era of people downloading music and they just want things in little 2 and 3 minute bits, and they're like, nope, here's 2.5 hours. That was such a Dream Theater thing to do.
Yeah, I think musically I loved it. I think lyrically I kind of got a bit of a Star Wars 2112 vibe off it. So yeah, it's probably not one of my favorites, I'll be honest, but you can't deny that it's, in terms of what's on there, it's great, but it just doesn't grab me as much as some of the other albums do.
Yep. So so you talked about, a minute ago, you were in the studio,
Mm.
as they were recording Octavarium, and obviously you saw stuff, again, professionalism, you can't put everything in the book, but is there anything that you can tell us that won't get you in trouble, from being in the studio and seeing how they work together? Is there any stories that you can tell us from actually being in that inner circle with them?
Not really. They're just hugely professional. I mean, it was obvious that really at that time, Mike and John were kind of controlling things and, determining how many takes the guys would do in the orchestra and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was just, it's just ridiculous to be asked to go in there and just watch them at work. But yeah, they were just professional as you'd expect, really. James wasn't there because obviously his vocals would always go on later. So I think it's probably good for James that in the last album or so he's been more involved during the writing, because he's got a lot to offer. I think he is dismissed a little bit in terms of what he can give. And if you listen to his solo album, that album is incredible. It's a fantastic album.
Yep.
I've listened to that album more than I have the last Dream Theater album. It's really good. And I think you've got him next week, haven't you? I think.
Yep. Next Saturday at 1 p.m. Yeah, we've got him, Chance, and Paul Logue as well. To tell, I'm with you. That record is, man. I'm glad you brought that up because, when you listen to, and not just a Beautiful Shade of Grey, but I don't know if you're a fan of his previous stuff, but he's got an incredible sense of melody.
Yeah,
and his writing sensibilities are really strong.
Yeah, exactly. I think Paul Logue is, I think that's a really good partnership because Paul Logue is in Eden's Curse, and that's another great band as well. So he's got a real keen ear for melody, and probably, I don't know, I mean, I might be wrong in saying this, but he's probably written it with James's voice in mind, whereas how far did Dream Theater go to accommodate James's voice when they're writing? I don't know. I'm sure they do, but I think you can probably spend more time when there's just the two of you writing an album in terms of perfecting how James comes across on it.
Yep. I had the exact same thought. It's and granted, I mean, James is writing his own stuff, so obviously it's but yeah, with Paul, I thought the exact same thing. He's like, okay, well, how would James sing over this? How would James sing over this? Whereas, you got to kind of think that Jordan and John are probably like, hey, we're going to put out the most kick-ass prog stuff we can. What can you do over top of this? They so it's going to be interesting. It'll be fun to ask James that question, like, how it feels to have that sort of freedom outside of Dream Theater, and to really get his own voice out there. Because I completely agree with you that I think his contributions to the band are very underrated. And it's, I can't wait to ask him that question. So,
yeah.
So, getting back to your book, one of my favorite parts of the book, again, is, the later years.
Yeah.
And, the original version stops, after, Systematic Chaos. The new version does pick up with Portnoy leaving and, Black Clouds and stuff like that. But, talk a little bit about the vibe of the band at the time when you finished the first edition, because, all those years into their career, they really were just, bigger than they'd ever been. And they seemed genuinely happy. And a lot of bands that late into their career, like, they're just kind of going through the motions, but it really didn't feel like Dream Theater was doing that.
Yeah, they were kind of just at the point of playing arenas. And I think that was the surprising thing, is that a really weird time for Mike to leave, because it was just that time that when they were on the cusp of staying in arenas. So yeah, they seemed in a good place. I remember there was an interview that someone did with John Petrucci where he described the band, this is probably about 10 or 12 years ago, of going into the maintenance phase of the career, which I think is probably, he worded that badly because that sounds as though, they're just going to churn out an album every year and tour and turn into AC/DC, or something. But they never did, because I think they've managed to maintain that credibility in all the latest albums, really. But Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen over the next few years, I think. Um, I'm not sure how well the last tour did. I think they were still trying to sell out arenas over here, and I don't think they were. So whether things are on the wane a bit, I don't know. Uh,
What is the general vibe over there? I mean, you mentioned the concert attendance, and I know over here in the States, um, there is a large contingent of people that did not go to shows, Dream Theater being
yeah,
one of them, saying, well, if I have to wear a mask or if I have to be vaccinated, I'm not going. And that hurt attendance here for, any tour you can think of.
yeah.
What's the kind of general vibe over there, where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same. I think a lot of people probably didn't buy tickets because they're thinking, A, are they going to come? Is it going to be another lockdown or something? And I think certainly I haven't been to that many gigs since things opened up, probably two. So it's hard to kind of gauge. But at the moment, there's a feeling that everything's almost back to normal again, really. So I think things will start to pick up. I mean, I think Dream Theater were wise in that they took out a limited show. So, it wasn't a massive production. It was just, relatively stripped back, still looked good and sounded great. But at least that meant if things did get locked down, they weren't taking a hit financially, which so many bands did. So yeah, I think as time goes on, I suspect that the audience will come back and they'll be back up to playing the numbers that they were before. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. It's been interesting to see that Mike Portnoy and James are back on speaking terms again, because I think that was the one block, to them all getting on well together again. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, that was a crazy story when I saw that pop up on Blabbermouth. I was like, wow.
Yeah, it's good.
It was, and I give James all the credit in the world,
Mhm.
for opening himself up to, Mike again, because, being truthful, that hot mic incident that Portnoy had when he, he kind of,
Yeah,
disrespected James, and, we all, found out about that. Like that, it takes a big man to get over something like that, because, James worked his ass off for Mike for how
yeah,
many years, and especially, like we talked about, the vocal injury he sustained, back on the Awake tour, and just keep going and going and going. That had to be really painful. So I give James all the credit in the world for,
yeah,
for doing that and everything. And, but just like from a fan standpoint of, it's cool to see old friends reconnecting, because you don't want to think of a band you're a fan of hating each other, so
yeah, yeah. I mean, the Liquid Tension stuff, that was good as well to hear those three get together again. Obviously with Tony Levin, but I mean, yeah, how far that will go, I don't know.
yep. Do you think?
Um,
I mean, everybody asks this question. Like, I personally don't care about this question, but
yeah,
do you think they'll ever get back together with Portnoy for anything?
I'd be hugely surprised if they didn't at some point down the line. You know, whether that's a creative decision or a business decision, or just something to do for fun, a big reunion to celebrate, the same way they did with Charlie,
Yep.
and do a one-off show where they try and get all the old members back in again. Yeah, I think that would happen, certainly. But yeah, I don't know. Um, Certainly, I think if Mike Portnoy did go back in, it would have to be a completely different arrangement than what it was before he left, because he did, run a lot of things. So he'd probably have to go back and just take a bit more of a step back if it ever happened. But I'd like to see it, but that's just because, sentimental and just to see it again. That's
Yep.
so. I don't know. I think there's just a lot of people that are in the same way people find the Astonishing divisive. They probably find Mike Portnoy a bit divisive as well. You look on the forums, it's who's the better drummer, and yeah. So I don't know. Um,
Yeah, I don't get into all that stuff. Like, I mean,
yeah.
I think like you said, I think like a kind of like a celebration concert type thing. I
Mm,
don't think, the one thing I absolutely love about Dream Theater is that, they are loyal. They're like just good people, and
mm,
you obviously found that out like firsthand right in the
yeah.
book. And I love that they're loyal, and they flat out said, excuse me, Mangini is our drummer till we're done. And I love that loyalty. So, I agree with you. I think, we'll probably see a one-off and he'll get on stage at some point and everything. And the thing that I wonder about it, though, I wonder if they can do that, because there is going to be that segment of the fan base that says, oh, now you got to get him back full time. They won't just accept that it's a one-off concert. You know what I mean? So I think that's going to be a difficult thing for them.
I think it would be. Practically, whether I just don't know whether there's the want for them to do it or not. Life's probably easier for them with Mike Mangini in the band. Just as I say before, there's none of that stat list changing. There's it's probably more of a democracy than it was before. But you always need one or two people to lead the ship. So I don't know if they'd ever do it. I just hope they do. Because certainly, watching them on stage when you had Mike Portnoy behind the drums, it was more entertaining. That's not to diminish Mike Mangini, because he's a fantastic drummer, but it's not that. It doesn't seem right watching them without him there, even though it's been 13 years. So
yeah. So I have to ask you, because I was there as well. Talk about how incredible being at Radio City was in 2006 for Score. That was how that experience for me was absolutely incredible. So
it was insane. I mean, the good thing about it was really great. There was a couple of people on the Mike Portnoy forum who were really helpful to me when I was writing the book. There's a guy called Scott Hansen, whose knowledge is insane, and there was Ray Beardsley, who again ran the website, and he was also supportive and just knew everything to do with DT. So it was nice to meet up with those guys, and then end up in that. I mean, I'd never realized how big Radio City was before I went in there. It's huge, and just to be able to watch them at close quarters doing the first part of the set, and then the second half when there's the full orchestra on stage, it was great. Really, really unbelievable.
Did you know that they were going to have an orchestra for the second half of the show, or was that a surprise to you as well?
No, I knew.
Okay.
But I was surprised how well it worked, but they had it all scored out, obviously, and it just sounded fantastic, really. I remember John Petrucci wasn't very well at that show at all. He had a really bad flu, so he did well to get through it. But it was great, and obviously then the DVD comes out, and you can just relive it. I mean, So I take it you were there. Do you say?
I was there, and I actually ended up in the documentary on the second disc. So I'm that guy. I'm in your book. I'm in there, their DVD. That was. Man, it was like you said. Like I didn't know how big it was either. It's the first time I had been there, and it was just mind-boggling how good they sounded. And I'm glad you mentioned John not being very healthy at the show, because I remember that. Like I had read something at the time, seeing that, and the 2 weeks prior to Radio City, the second to last show they did before that was here in Cleveland, where I live, and James was sick as a dog. And he was on stage, and between songs he would say, "Hey, sorry." And if he wouldn't have said he was sick, you wouldn't have known. It was incredible, to the point where the encore was "Learning to Live," and he hit that super high note at the end. I'm like, this guy's a superhero, man. Like, he's got the flu and he's doing that. So they must have been passing it around the bus or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, we did not know, obviously, about the orchestra. And one of my favorite parts of rewatching the show is when the curtain comes up and you hear the crowd just explode. Like, having been there, knowing that is honest to God surprise. I looked at my buddy like, what the hell are we seeing? Oh my God. Like, it was so cool. And just one of those perfect Dream Theater moments where they just give you more than what you pay for.
Yeah.
And bringing it full circle back to your book, I think you did that with your novel, not being a fanboy because you're on the show, but, we talked for a few minutes before we jumped on here. It is a fantastic book, and it really digs deep into the band. It's definitely not a surface level fluff piece in any way. anybody watching this and listening to this, you've got to go buy this book. It is, if you are a fan of Dream Theater, you are going to love everything about this book. It's such a great deep dive, and man, I can't tell you enough how much I love the book, Rich. And it's like I love hearing the stories about it and everything. And do you have a favorite memory from that time period of working on this and getting it put together?
It was just all brilliant. I mean, I've written a book since then on Porcupine Tree, which was completely the opposite. There was no band involvement, so you're really struggling to get momentum on it. So just to have that access, and being in the studio, watching them record an album, I mean, it doesn't get better than that, because I was a fan, but at the same time, you have to have that distance, between you, so that you can ask the awkward questions, I suppose. And that's difficult, I think. I mean, I was interviewing Jordan for about 6-7 weeks ago, and you have to ask a difficult question because all over the internet there's all this stuff about his James lip syncing, so you have to ask that question, which is it's difficult. But that's the job, I guess. You've got to ask the difficult questions as well as enjoy being a fan. But I mean, it was all great. The access was fantastic, and the fact that I didn't have to have anything edited by anyone, it was just came out as I'd written it. It was just just unbelievable. Really enjoyed writing. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and so many other people still seem to enjoy it, even though it's years since it came out. It means a lot.
It's like I say, we're giving away a copy here today. I mean, I definitely want our fans to check it out if they haven't. So again, guys, send us an email at talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com, and the first response we get, I will send you a copy of Lifting Shadows, Rich's phenomenal Dream Theater biography. So won't keep you too much longer, Rich. I appreciate your time. Just a little bit longer here with you, if you don't mind. So, were there questions you asked that they flat out would not answer?
No, I don't think so. There was something in that. There was a little bit of, I can't remember when it was, but there was a suggestion that maybe they were thinking of replacing John Mayung with Dave LaRue, I think it was, at some point in the history, and that's in the book. But so I think it was more said, after a couple of beers on the back of the tour buses, would it be great to play with him rather than seriously thinking of taking John Mayung out of the band. But so that was something that was kind of, I had to dodge a little bit. But no, they were just so open. I mean, no one refused to answer a question. There was nothing of note that was taken out. So just lucky, no censorship, and everyone was very open and friendly, really.
Wow, I did not expect that. I can't picture anybody but John Mayung in that spot. No. That's like, we talked about removing Portnoy, like, oh my God, but it almost feels more weird to not have John Mayung up there.
Yeah.
like I'm thinking of Dave LaRue. I'd be like, who the hell is this guy?
So I'm sure it's in the book. If it isn't, I've dropped a clanger, but I'm pretty sure it is. So it would never have happened realistically, because he is just, again, integral part of the band, isn't he?
Yep.
So
we had we talked to Monty Colvin from the Galactic Cowboys a couple months ago, and he was talking about Mayung, and he was talking about tour stories from the Images tour, and he said, "It's like, seriously, that guy never stops playing bass. Like, we'd be out like hanging out at a bar or something, getting food or whatever, and he's just in his hotel or in the in the bus just playing bass. Like, that's all the guy does." And
I'm sure it's like a meditation for him. I was at they did a big festival gig in England, and I was sort of backstage there, and whilst the rest of the band are in their sort of in the cabin backstage, John's at the side of the stage just practicing bass, literally on his own for 45 minutes, just playing away. So I'm sure he just does it to relax. But
have you seen his little onstage kind of, like, he's got that like private little room? Have you seen that? Have you actually seen that yourself? Or
no, I've heard about it, but I've never seen it. So
okay.
I'm sure it's yeah, it's just, I think it's probably just his way of handling the pressure, really.
Yep.
Just to constantly be practicing and, yeah, almost like meditating for him, I think. But,
I, I've always loved that concept that he's, to me, it's he just only cares about playing. He's like, I'm gonna have my own little private thing. I don't want to do the interviews. I don't want to do the, the all this other stuff. Like I just like playing music. Like I just think it's so pure.
yeah,
I love that, and some people have a problem with it, like, oh, we don't see or hear from John Myung very much. I'm like, well, that's kind of cool though, right? I mean,
yeah,
you don't want him to be like a big, blown up ego. It's nice to see
yeah,
that he still just does it for the same reasons he did it when he was, back at Berkeley.
yeah. And I think Jordan's the same, really. I think he's one of those people who'd be just happy just playing the piano anywhere. If he was in a bar or wherever, he's just wants to play, really. Which is, yeah, it's a good thing.
Yep. Yeah, it sucks. He's coming. He's July 9th. He's playing like 25 minutes from me, and I got a show of my own. And I can't make it. Because it's it's a smaller place. It's intimate, and to see. I mean, I'm sure you've done this. You're a big music fan yourself. When you see a talent of that caliber in a small little environment like that, it's just
Yeah,
it's phenomenal.
yeah, it is. I saw Marillion play at a restaurant once. That was an interesting one. It's just,
Wow.
that was great as well. But it just you can't beat experiences like that. Seeing great musicians in a small space, rather than arena gigs are bad for that because you're always miles away from the stage. So it's nice to see them in a more confined space, really. But
Yep. Well, Rich, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. Again, I'm a huge fan of the book. Guys,
Thank
if you
you.
would like to get a copy, very welcome, man. Guys, if you would like to get a copy of Lifting Shadows, just shoot us an email at talkingintoinfinity@gmail.com. And the first response we get, I will send you a copy of Lifting Shadows. Rich, what else you got? What else you got going on right now? What are you working on?
No books. I'm doing magazine work for Prog magazine, so that's the main sort of output that I'm working on. So yeah, the Porcupine Tree book. I need to update that at some point. And then we'll take it from there.
Awesome. Well,
So
man, thank you so very much for coming on. It's been fantastic talking to you. Again, thanks for making the time.
thank you.
Guys, you're very welcome. Guys, don't forget, we are live on Saturday, June 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Paul Logue, Chance Labrie, and James Labrie, and we will be doing a deep dive into James's fabulous new solo record, A Beautiful Shade of Gray. Don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, click that like and subscribe button so that you get notified every time we go live. And until next time, I've been your host, John. Rich, thank you again. And guys, we'll see you. Carpe diem.